Let me tell you something most people never realize until much later in life. What breaks us is not always what happens to us, but what we choose to bury deep inside and never face. See, we often think strength means keeping it together, smiling when we want to cry, saying, "I'm fine," when inside we are anything but fine. But here's the truth that nobody likes to admit. The emotions we repress don't disappear. They linger. They settle like dust in the corners of our mind. Invisible at first, but heavy enough to shape the way we think, the way we behave, even the way our body feels. And here's the twist. Those very emotions that we lock away in the name of survival are often the ones silently making us weaker over time. But why? Why do we repress emotions in the first place? From an early age, many of us are taught a dangerous myth that strength is about how well we can hide our feelings. The world applauds those who stay composed, who smile when their hearts are breaking, who say, "I'm fine," even when they are anything but fine. On the surface, this looks like resilience. It looks like control. But beneath that polished exterior, something very different is happening. The truth is, when we suppress emotions, they don't simply dissolve. They don't vanish into thin air just because we lock them away. Instead, they linger, quietly weaving themselves into the fabric of our minds and bodies. Think of them like echoes in a canyon, faint at first, but always bouncing back, always present. Or imagine dust gathering in the corners of a room. At first it seems invisible, harmless even, but left long enough it grows thick, heavy, and impossible to ignore. This is the paradox of repression. What feels like survival in the moment, hiding your tears, swallowing your anger, numbing your sadness, slowly becomes the very thing that erodes your strength over time. The emotions you thought you buried remain alive, shaping your thoughts, influencing your choices, even altering how your body feels day after day. A clenched jaw, a restless night's sleep, a burst of irritation at something trivial. These are often not random at all. They are the whispers of feelings you told yourself didn't matter. But if repression is so costly, why do we do it? Why do so many of us convince ourselves that keeping emotions hidden is a sign of courage rather than avoidance? The answer lies in the stories we've been told about what it means to be strong. For many, strength has been defined as endurance, enduring pain without showing it, enduring disappointment without complaint, enduring heartbreak without shedding a tear. Vulnerability, in contrast, has been branded weakness. To express sadness is to risk being seen as fragile. To admit fear is to risk being seen as incapable. And so, rather than risk exposure, we tighten our grip on our feelings, pushing them further and further down, convincing ourselves that silence is power. But psychology paints a very different picture. Research consistently shows that emotions are not flaws to be hidden, but signals to be understood. Anger alerts us when boundaries are crossed. Sadness points us to what truly matters in our lives. Fear warns us of danger, but also calls us toward growth. When these signals are silenced, they don't cease to exist. They transform. Unfelt anger turns into irritability or chronic stress. Unacknowledged sadness may harden into numbness or fatigue. Suppressed fear can morph into rigid control or anxiety that seems to appear out of nowhere. So while repression may look like strength from the outside, it actually chips away at resilience from within. It creates a fragile kind of strength, brittle, breakable, a mask that cracks the moment life applies pressure. And when those cracks appear, we are left wondering why we feel so drained, so restless, so unlike ourselves. Here's the irony. In trying to appear unbreakable, we often make ourselves more fragile. True strength isn't about ignoring emotions. It's about being willing to face them, to sit with them, and to let them move through us instead of letting them haunt us from the shadows. So the illusion continues. Society tells us that the stoic face is strong, that the unshakable voice is admirable, that the absence of tears is noble. But beneath the surface, the cost is high. Suppression may win us approval in the short run, but over time, it drains the very energy and resilience we need to thrive. And this brings us to the next question. the one that changes everything. Why do we repress emotions in the first place? What makes us believe that hiding our inner world is safer than living it? If repression silently weakens us, the natural question is, why do we do it? Why would anyone willingly carry the hidden weight of emotions instead of setting them free? The answer lies in the way we're shaped from the very beginning of life. From childhood, most of us are taught, directly or indirectly, that emotions are divided into two categories, good and bad. Happiness, excitement, and joy are celebrated. But sadness, anger, fear? These are often treated as flaws, inconveniences, or even punishments waiting to happen. Think back. How many times were you told to stop crying, to be strong, or to toughen up? These words may have been meant as encouragement, but they carried a powerful hidden message. Certain emotions are unsafe to show. Over time, this message hardens into a rule that plays on repeat in the subconscious. If I reveal what I feel, I won't be accepted. If I express too much, I'll be judged or abandoned. And so, without even realizing it, we begin to police our inner world. We swallow anger, bury sadness, and lock away fear, convinced that by doing so, we're protecting ourselves from harm. It's not only families that shape this belief. Society reinforces it at every turn. The colleague who never complains is praised as professional. The friend who hides their pain is admired as strong. The culture of keep it together becomes a standard, teaching us that vulnerability equals weakness. And so repression doesn't feel like a choice. It feels like survival, but here's the catch. Emotions aren't designed to be silenced. They're meant to move, to deliver their message, and then pass. When we shut them down, they don't die, they disguise themselves. Psychologists call this symptom substitution. The sadness we repress may return as numbness or lack of motivation. The anger we bury may resurface as irritability, hostility, or unexplained stress. Fear, unacknowledged, may take the shape of perfectionism, hypercontrol, or avoidance. One of the most striking concepts in psychology is what Freud called the return of the repressed. Modern research backs this idea. Emotions don't vanish, they wait. They reappear in our dreams, in slips of the tongue, in sudden outbursts we can't explain. Picture it like a beach ball forced underwater. You can push it down with all your strength, but eventually it bursts back to the surface with even greater force. That's what happens when emotions are repressed. They gather energy in the shadows, waiting for a moment to erupt. And often, this eruption doesn't look dramatic. It looks ordinary. A short temper, a sense of emptiness, a restless night of sleep. These everyday struggles are frequently the echoes of emotions we once decided not to feel. So why do we repress? Because at some point in life, hiding felt safer than expressing. Because silence felt less risky than honesty. But what once protected us as children becomes poison in adulthood. And this is the tragedy. The very habit that once helped us survive can later keep us from truly living. This brings us to the deeper truth. Repression is never neutral. It always leaves a mark on our minds, our bodies, and our relationships. And if we want to understand just how deeply it shapes us, we need to turn to the science that reveals what really happens inside us when emotions are pushed away. We've explored why we learn to repress emotions, but what actually happens inside us when we do? Psychology and neuroscience give us some fascinating answers. On the surface, suppression feels like control. You push down the anger, silence the sadness, lock away the fear, and keep moving. But beneath that surface, the brain and body are waging an invisible battle. Neuroscientists have discovered that when we suppress an emotion, two powerful regions of the brain are activated at once. The prefrontal cortex, responsible for rational thought and self-control, works over time to keep the feeling hidden. At the same time, the amygdala, the brain's emotional alarm system, continues to fire as if the emotion is still alive and present. This creates a paradox. Even when we believe we've shut a feeling down, the body reacts as though it's still happening. Think of it like running a heavy program in the background of your computer. You can't see it, but it's draining energy, slowing everything else down. Suppressed emotions are exactly like that. They sap energy silently, leaving us exhausted without knowing why. But the effects go deeper than mental fatigue. Studies in health psychology show that chronic emotional suppression is linked to higher stress hormone levels, weakened immune function, and increased risk of anxiety and depression. Physical symptoms often emerge: headaches, muscle tension, stomach issues that don't seem connected to emotions on the surface, but are in fact their hidden consequences. The body in its own way keeps the score. Research published in the Journal of Personality and Social Psychology revealed another striking truth. People who habitually repress emotions actually have lower resilience to stress. In other words, the very act of hiding feelings, something we think makes us strong, leaves us less capable of handling life's challenges. Repression weakens the foundation it pretends to protect, and the cost isn't only internal. Suppressed emotions shape how we show up in relationships. Repressed anger often turns into weak boundaries, where a person says yes when they desperately want to say no. Repressed sadness can create disconnection, making it difficult to form authentic bonds. Repressed fear often shows up as over-controlling behavior, a need to manage everything so that the hidden vulnerability never surfaces. This is why repression feels like control, but is really the opposite. You're not controlling your emotions are controlling you from behind the curtain. You may believe you've silenced them, but in truth, they've simply changed costumes and returned in ways harder to recognize. So the science is clear: suppression doesn't erase emotions, it entangles us with them. It turns what could have been a temporary wave of sadness, anger, or fear into a constant background noise draining our strength. And this leads to an important shift. If repression isn't strength, then what is? If hiding makes us weaker, what would it mean to meet emotions differently, not as enemies to silence, but as messengers to understand? If repression quietly drains us, the question becomes, what's the alternative? Do we just express every emotion without filter? Do we let anger erupt, sadness spill, and fear run unchecked? Not quite. The real answer lies in something more balanced: integration. Integration means allowing emotions to exist without letting them dominate. It's not repression, and it's not explosion, it's recognition. It's saying, this is what I feel, and I can face it without being consumed by it. Think of emotions as teachers rather than enemies. Anger teaches us where our boundaries lie. Sadness reveals what truly matters to our hearts. Fear points us to the places where growth is waiting. When we repress these emotions, we silence the lessons they're trying to give us. But when we acknowledge them, we gain wisdom instead of weakness. At first, facing repressed feelings can feel overwhelming. The emotions we've buried often come back with force: unexpected tears, bubbling frustration, sudden exhaustion. It feels like breaking. But in truth, it's the beginning of healing. Much like a storm, the intensity eventually passes, and what remains is clarity. Psychology and neuroscience back this up. Brain scan studies show that simply naming an emotion, I feel angry, I feel afraid, I feel sad, reduces activity in the amygdala and increases regulation in the prefrontal cortex. In other words, acknowledging what you feel literally shifts your brain from survival mode to self-control. By bringing feelings into the light, they lose their power to overwhelm. This shift doesn't just change your inner world, it transforms your relationships too. Vulnerability, often mistaken for weakness, is the foundation of real connection. When you let someone see your authentic self, not just the polished mask, but the raw truth, you invite them to do the same. That's how intimacy, love, and trust deepen. Ironically, the very thing we fear being seen in our fragility is what makes us most human and most connected. So why don't we all do this naturally? Fear. Fear of being judged, of being rejected, of facing truths about ourselves that may change everything. Repression isn't chosen because it's best. It's chosen because it feels safer. But safety without authenticity is only survival. Aliveness comes from honesty, from daring to feel without letting feelings define us. The path forward doesn't require dramatic confrontation. It begins with small, quiet acts of honesty. Journaling instead of burying thoughts. Pausing to ask yourself, what am I really feeling beneath the surface? Speaking with someone you trust. Learning to name emotions without judgment. These practices gradually rewire the brain, training you to process instead of repress. And this is the paradox. The strength we've been searching for doesn't come from hiding, but from integrating. By feeling instead of burying, we don't become weaker, we become unshakable. We learn that emotions rise and fall like waves. They don't last forever. They don't define us. And once we know this, we stop fearing them. So perhaps real strength isn't about how much we can hold back, but about how deeply we are willing to feel, and how gracefully we let those feelings move through us.